Deb Delisle is the Assistant Secretary for Elementary and Secondary Education in the U.S. Department of Education. She also serves as the Principal Advisor to the U.S. Secretary of Education on all matters related to pre-K, elementary, and secondary education. In this position, she plays a pivotal role in policy and management issues which affect our schools. She directs, coordinates, and recommends policy for programs designed to assist state and local education agencies with improving the achievement of elementary and secondary school students. She helps ensure equal access to services leading to improvement for all children, particularly children who are economically disadvantaged. She fosters educational improvement at the state and local levels. Prior to her role at the department, Deb served as Senior Fellow with the International Center for Leadership and Education with a deep interest in educator performance systems and creating transformative cultures in schools and districts. From 2008 to 2011, she served as Ohio's 35th State Superintendent of Public Instruction. Deb's career in education spans 37 years. She's worked as a teacher, a gifted education specialist, curriculum director, elementary principal, associate superintendent, and superintendent. She is truly one of us. She knows where we are, she knows where we've been, and she's here today as a friend and an advisor. We're very pleased to have Deb Delisle. Please give her a Missouri welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks, Chris. That was really a great introduction. I always get a little hesitant when somebody goes to introduce me, only because if they start reading through my bio, most often somebody will say, I'm hoping I could pull this up, somebody will say like, wow, that woman can't keep a job. But actually, one of the things that I just really love is being able to bring to the Department of Ed this sort of background, because I feel like I bring your voice into the department all the time, and it may come as a surprise to you, but there are actually very few people at the Department of Ed who have experience in public education. Most of them are attorneys and policy folks, and most of them haven't been in a classroom or in a school, and it's not to suggest that they don't care about schools and kids, but it's just the way it is. So traditionally, I'm the voice at the table who says, well, you know what, that doesn't really work that way, or a state can't do that, or a principal's not going to be able to do that, and most of all, the superintendent's going to get really angry if you kind of muck around in that area. So that's the voice I bring to the department. I actually also want to say thank you so much to Chris. I got to know her really well when I was a state chief. We did a lot of work together, and so you have just an awesome person in your corner trying to do the right things for kids in Missouri, so I really appreciate that. So as Chris mentioned, I serve in the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education. There's a couple of statistics here about the department itself, but in our program office, we're the largest program office in the department, and we serve all of the programs and services for students and their families and educators from birth through grade 12. This is the first administration that actually has created an office for early learning, and we're really excited about that because we've been working really hard to make the connection between students transitioning successfully into kindergarten and that 4-year-old to grade 3 space, which has been a lot of work over the last year. We also do most of the big name programs, so we have Title I, we have Title II, Title III, we have all the school improvement grants if you have any SIG programs in your schools. We do all the teacher quality work, and then we do a lot of programs that you may not know anything about, such as we have programs from Native Alaskans, Native Hawaiians. We deal with the Marshall Islands and the Philippines and Guam, and the list goes on and on. We do all of the work for safe and healthy students, which is a really busy office because anytime learning happens to be interrupted, we actually step into that space to help schools get learning up and running again. And that learning can be interrupted by a tragic event such as Newtown, or a tornado that comes through the town and destroys a school or some other component of the community. So it's a very busy office. And most notably, we do all of the work around ESEA waivers. So we're very busy, and we are also facing sequestration with limited staff to do all of that work. But I bring you that just to let you know that it's been an exciting time at the department. So what I want to share with you today, and I will try to stay on time so you can get onto your schedules, What I want to share with you today is a little bit of an overview of what I've seen over the last 13 months as I've traveled across the country and have visited schools, and in particular I've sat down with superintendents and principals to talk about sort of the why behind the need to transform education in this particular century. And before I go on, I was in the room last night when the new superintendents were welcomed. I want to welcome you one more time to one of the greatest jobs in the world. Somebody asked me yesterday if the job that I currently have is the best thing I've ever done, and I have to tell you, it isn't. I loved being a superintendent. It sort of came out bad. Hope nobody says that to the Department of Ed. It's just, I loved being a superintendent. I loved my kids. And so I always think back fondly to those kids. I was a superintendent in an urban district right outside of Cleveland. And I always think about that because I think about the kind of work, that's where the real work happens. You're leading people to do the real work inside classrooms every single day. So we can make policies in DC. We can hope that they get implemented. But your personality, your vision, your leadership is what really is essential to students every day. So I really want to thank you for stepping into the zone of the great superintendent job. I want to talk a little bit about our kids, and I'm not going to read through all of our slides, but I was doing a little bit of background research and thinking about this year's freshmen going into high school and how dramatically different they happen to be. And you can see, first of all, the very first thing on the slide is they're the most racially and ethnically diverse group in U.S. history ever. That may not appear to be like that in some of your schools, but it's true across the country. And what that is suggesting to us as we do a lot of research on how kids are responding in their classrooms is the fact that they are much more open to diversity and to actually talking about those issues that make us America, right? But other kinds of things, they grew up with romper room. Now I'm looking at some of you here and I'm realizing that some of you may have grown up without romper room too. So, but they did. They've never seen an airline ticket. They never had, you know, one of those penciled in library cards that would stick in the back of the jacket? They probably think of those as antiques. They wouldn't know it to walk up to a card catalog. And I started my career teaching second grade, and those poor second graders thinking about the Dewey Decimal System. Because they're like, who is that person and why do we need it? And just as an aside, if you ever go to an antique store and find a card catalog, they make really great wine holders. They're exactly the right size for a bottle of wine. Our kids don't think about encyclopedias. But what that suggests is that because of the advent of the smartphone and tablets, our kids come to school now with this huge appetite for instant gratification. It's a huge appetite. They want the information now. They want to know what's up. They want to keep connecting, and they do so with great ease. But when we create systems, or we don't even create them, we further keep them along, like in the status quo, that as long as you could turn a page in a book, you're going to learn something. We see more and more kids who are getting tuned out. And I'll talk a little bit about that with the transition to college and career-ready standards. But they don't think of Amazon as a river, and they're like, what, are you kidding me? There have always been blue M&Ms. What's up with that? The kids are so different from us. Email is much too slow for them. In fact, about 35% of colleges and universities right now no longer take kids' emails. They don't even take them anymore because kids aren't connecting by way of email. Texting is probably a little ancient for them, but they're still doing it in all kinds of social media ways. But the thing that shocks me is their lives have spanned 3 decades, 2 centuries, and 2 millenniums. Few people in history have ever been able to claim such a feat. And if you happen to go on, if you want to do anything with your staffs, just go on and find some historical occurrences that happened before a certain age, before a timeline, to just show what's happening. So if we know that about our kids, there are some essential questions for us as educational leaders. How can our schools meet them in their world? We've already heard the strategies that when kids come to school, they tune out or they turn off. And we're all struggling with that. What does that mean in an electronic age? What do we do with smartphones coming into schools? But I can share with you that the schools that have had the most dramatic responses in achievement and escalations in achievement have been those schools who have stepped back to say, let's redesign our schools for our kids' future, not for our present. So how can we redefine learning so that it's not limited to classrooms and bell schedules and predetermined sets of texts and readings and lectures? Now, having been a superintendent in a school district, I know that one of the hardest things you can ever do is to ever even begin to tinker with the bell schedule, right? I mean, people go absolutely bananas over that. You can change textbooks, you can get rid of textbooks, you can change report cards. As soon as you get into that bell schedule, whoa, too scary. But as a leader, you've got to figure out, what do we want for our kids? So even what we know, I was reading something the other day, somebody had forwarded an email. It was a school district I was in another state, and they were all excited because they were flipping their bell schedule. So we all know about high school kids wanting to sleep in. They're starting their high school kids like at 9:30 in the morning. This has caused huge consternation in the community. It took them 3 years to get there. And I was like, I hope it lasts 3 years. Because a lot of things have to happen. But these were superintendent principals who got together and said, what are we doing to our kids? They're not showing up on time on Monday morning. So all those things, we have to think about redefining learning. And then how can we let kids remain tuned in and on? But most especially, how can we give credit for learning outside the classroom or the school? If we had an opportunity, I'd show you how many people are doing this across the country, and it's pretty phenomenal to me. So when I was in Ohio, we actually had, I'm going to blank the name on the exact legal term we were using, but it was credit for outside the classroom. And it was so essential to me because when I was a superintendent, we had students in our high school who were actually doing research work at the Cleveland Clinic. Now you have to put this in perspective because our school district was 78% students of color, but 82% of the students lived in poverty. Almost all of them would be first-generation college kids if they went to college. So these were kids who were doing phenomenal things, and yet when they walked back into their biology class in high school, it didn't matter what they were doing down at the Cleveland Clinic. So we had to think through, how do we give credit for learning outside that classroom and outside the school? So what we're faced with right now is this is an enormous challenge, but we've been given a great opportunity at this moment in time. Right now, our future looks like something totally different than what we're having our schools defined as. So we've got to think about ways to prepare the kids of today for a world that is yet to be created, for jobs yet to be invented, and for technologies yet undreamed. There's no harder job in the whole world, and there's nothing that has greater meaning than being an educator in today's time and space. So when you think about opening up your schools this year, think about, what do our kids need for their future, not for our present? How can we redefine learning for them? How can we get them to create such hope for themselves that they believe that this is the best place they've ever been? That being in your school district is the greatest thing because people are investing in them. The most important thing I really want you to take away today is kids depend on us as leaders all the time. Every decision we make, every decision tells students what it is that we value. And as a superintendent, I have to say that nothing happens in that school district without telling kids what you value. So when you are faced with buying a bus, and I'm not suggesting you don't buy them, you know how much buses cost, but you also know that something has to offset that. If you get rid of the art program, it tells kids what matters. It doesn't mean you don't buy the bus, but how do you balance that out? And I want you to think about your school district. How many of you have a program in your school district that's existed for a very long time? People love it, but perhaps it's not getting the same kind of results that was originally intended. So when I became a superintendent, there was a program in our school district, and it was a very worthy program. It was called Imhotep. It was a very worthy program. It had been in existence for 10 years, and it had started because we had 21 AP courses. It was a very large comprehensive high school. And what started as a really great program with great goals, which was to include more students of color in our AP courses so that our AP courses look like our school, it was really a well-designed program. It cost $1 million a year to run. It was huge. So over the course of 10 years, they had spent $10 million on this program and had received all kinds of awards in its initiation. But you know what ended up happening? We were faced with a huge budget shortfall. So I had to look at every program. Is it doing what it says it's going to do for kids, right? And so this was one program that came up to under review. And what I noticed was that I started walking in the high school and I started looking at all the AP courses. I could count on one hand over 21 AP courses how many students of color were sitting in those classes. I was like, are you kidding me? We spent $10 million and we get 4 students of color into AP courses? So we put it up for a review, and the word got out and people thought we were going to cut the program as opposed to redefining it. And all these people showed up at board meetings, like till 1 in the morning. We have all these people coming into board meetings about the program. And I remember sitting there thinking, you know, I always think, I'll always keep a job if nobody could read the cartoon bubble over my head. Because, you know, people are coming in, my kid loves the program, my kid loves the program. The cartoon bubble over my head by the 14th parent was, kids like beer and wine, we don't serve it in the cafeteria. You know, I'm thinking like, what? People were missing the point. And when I would ask people, what do they like about the program? Oh, they love getting out of school to go mentor some kids at the middle school. I'm like, it isn't working. We don't have anybody in the AP courses that we wanted to grab. So every decision that we make tells kids what it is that we value. And now that I'm at the federal level, I could tell you, kids don't care if you're Republican or Democrat. They want you to make the best choices for them at that moment in time, particularly for those kids who don't necessarily have a voice, or whose families don't have a voice. They don't know how to do school well. So what I'm talking about and hoping for you is that you think seriously about creating a culture of excellence for all, and all means all. So we always think about kids in this capacity. We think about how do we challenge them, how do we support them. There's no greater support that they're going to need than when you're transitioning into college and career-ready standards. How do we do that? But we're also talking about staff. In our most rapidly improving schools in the country, what we're finding is that people take an opportunity, leaders in a school district take the opportunity to support teachers in their work so that teachers don't feel like their bag of tricks is empty by December. But they spend time looking at student work. And I can guarantee you that almost every group of teachers who comes together the first time out to look at student work, they don't even know how to do it. It's not that they don't want to do it. They haven't been trained to do it. So I actually have to create protocols and templates for them to do that. But we've got to provide opportunities for teachers to come together to talk about what's going on in their schools, to share best practices. It's some of the best professional development that's going on across the country now, as opposed to the sort of one-offs, what I always call the sit and get workshops. People who are coming together to think about, so what strategies are you using? I know your kids are doing really well with fractions. What strategies do you use? How can I learn from you? And then the last is one that's really going unnoticed in many places, and it's creating a culture of excellence for all, including families. And what I'm talking about is really thinking through strategically about how do you engage families in their child's learning. I had an experience several months ago. I was asked to come into a school district because they had done a significant amount of work on family engagement. So I was like, wow, that's great. Okay, I'll come. So I was going to go to the high school first. And we had a meeting beforehand, and I asked the high school principal what I should see when I walk in the building on family engagement. He said, oh, it's great. You're going to see a family room that parents can come in and get resources. And you're going to find all these opportunities for parents. They can select out parenting books. We have local community members who come in who talk about parenting and discipline and blah, 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 blah. And it goes on and on. So I was like, yeah, I'm excited. Now, I'm a believer that everything that happens in a school, and I'll talk a little bit about this in a moment on culture, everything tells me something about that school when I walk in. Because I always think about, do I want my own kid in this school when I go into a school? So the very first thing, I run up the stairs of the school, and there's some kids waiting for me, and this is the sign that I see on the doorway to the school. Parent hours, 3 to 4 p.m. Like, really? What were they before, 0? Like you increase them like 100%? Wow, that's amazing. Everything we do. So it's not about just sending home a newsletter to parent, but if you're in a community where families struggle to come to the school, figure out how to get to them. So again, in our most rapidly improving schools, we're finding all kinds of ways for people to connect with families, all kinds of ways. And it mostly does not fall into the category of, you know, if we offer it and they don't come, we stop. But people truly think about how to engage families. So I mentioned transitioning to college and career-ready standards, and I worry about this. I see the struggle. It's a huge transformation people are dealing with, whether it's a Common Core or college and career-ready standards. And this is my fear. My fear is that as we transition into these standards, that number one, we've not done enough with teachers. Perhaps we've done enough to unpack standards, but we've not talked to them about the instructional strategies that have to change as a result of engaging kids in deeper, more rigorous standards. And then worse, what keeps me awake at night is that maybe 3 or 4 years down the road, we're going to find people who say, see, I told you those kids couldn't do it. When it's not those kids' fault. What happens is, think about this, if you're, and I can't remember when you're transitioning, are you transitioning next year into college and career-ready standards? Next year?
Yes.
Or this year? This year and then next year for full implementation. But think about this, you're going to have ninth graders who haven't had college and career-ready standards until that point, right? So what happens to those ninth graders? What kinds of support structures do we provide? So as a superintendent, as a central office administrator, as a building principal, you've got to have the conversations with the staff. You ought to be able to talk through what's happening, how's it going, what do we need for supports and resources. And people need to know what's expected of them. But please don't ever talk about those kids as though they're somebody else's kids, because they belong to somebody. They belong to everybody. And here's a disturbing reality. I'm not going to read all of these, but our students of color and our students with disabilities and our students in poverty are suffering in our classrooms across America. Hopefully not in your school district. But they're more than twice as likely to be taught by teachers teaching out of field. It's a huge problem. And then we expect all of our kids to jump up and be ready to engage in college and career-ready standards. So looking at this, students from the highest poverty schools are 2 times less likely to get a high-performing math teacher than students in the lowest poverty schools. So even in poverty schools, you have a differentiation. And then our students of color have very little access to AP and IB programs. Very little access. So where's the advocacy for these kids? Where's the advocacy? Our kids rely on each one of us, each one of you, to make the right decisions for them. That's what's really critical. As we move into college and career-ready standards, I want you to know one essential lesson, and this is not rocket science, but relevance makes rigor possible. Relevance makes rigor possible. When kids understand what it is that they're doing and why, when they feel they have an investment in the learning activity, those kids step up to the plate. They find meaning in it. What they don't find meaning in is the constant professional page turners that we want them to become, especially at the secondary level. Page 21, page 22, page 23, let's finish all the math problems. Kids don't see relevance in that. And remember what I mentioned, these are kids who want instant gratification. So no matter what, these kids want to be engaged in their work. So let me just give you an example that was actually provided to me. I want you to think about let's say you're the superintendent or you're the building principal and you're doing a walkthrough in your school. This is a comparison, these are 2 real 10th grade teachers teaching in the same school, teaching the same level of kids. On the left, here's an assignment from one of those teachers. Write a composition of at least 4 paragraphs on Martin Luther King's most important contribution to this society. Illustrate your work with a neat cover page. What happens? Neatness counts. This is a woman or a man who probably alphabetizes their spices, right? Neatness counts. Here's a teacher right next door, same grouping of kids. A frequent theme in literature is the conflict between the individual and society. From literature you have read, select a character who struggled with society. In a well-developed essay, identify the character and explain why this character's conflict with society is important. So the big question is it accurate to say that what you learn depends on whom you get? And is it all right to say that? So think about this in your own personal life. Which teacher do you want your own child to have? Which one? And if you're saying the one on the right, why is it okay for other people's kids to have the one on the left? Why is that tolerable? Why is that acceptable? So as a principal, as a teacher, as a superintendent, as a curriculum director, why is this acceptable in one school, the same school? And what would you do about it if it was yours? So really critical. Here are 3 more examples. You know, one of the great things I have an opportunity to do is to go across the country and to visit schools and school districts. Here are 3 examples. I won't read through them all, but here's in a middle school in Maine. 7th graders are learning about soil bacteria. They're not just reading about it in books, but they're actually doing some hands-on experiments. They're distributing their completed pamphlets to local garden centers. They're making that connection. It's becoming real for them. At a high-tech high school in California, an 11th grade biology class are studying DNA barcoding to develop forensic techniques to help protect African wildlife. And some of the kids got to go to Tanzania. These are kids who had never been on a plane before. They fly around the world to go to Tanzania to work with people who are actually doing this work. They see that connection. Another school in Massachusetts, kids are designing their own water wheels and learning how to use them because when they go on a field trip to a historical site, they already know the information about it. They know why this water wheel was really important to people who lived in the 1600s. Rigor and relevance are connected, but relevance is what makes rigor possible because kids are invested in that. And I can give you countless examples across the country. So 2 essential questions that I want you to think for yourself is this school good enough for my own child? And as I mentioned before, if the answer to that question is no, then why is it okay for other people's kids? But here's an example. What do you want for your own children, cutouts or QR codes? So here's my example. I was in a school district in Virginia, and we were doing some work around our school improvement grants. So a lot of money going out to schools to see what's happening. I was in a middle school. It was in the middle of the city. I was in a middle school, and they knew I was coming. It's important for you to know that. And I'm walking around with the principal, and they had an external provider who was helping them to figure out this whole issue of how do you turn around a low-performing school. And so I went into a couple classrooms, and there were some good things going on, not extraordinary, but there were some good things. I thought, okay, they're kind of moving along here. But I went into a 7th grade class, and it was a 7th grade keyboarding class. Now, I can tell you there are very few keyboarding classes left in America, but there was one in this school district. So when it was a very typical keyboarding class, and kids are just kind of typing along on the keyboard. And I left the classroom, and all of a sudden, the teacher comes running after me and says, wait a minute, I got to show you. I'm so excited about what our kids did last week. And I was like, whoa, let me see. And I wish I had taken one so you could truly believe me, but I'm not fibbing about this. He had a stack of the really large construction paper, huge stack of them. And he says, my kids created a computer. They developed and built a computer last week. Those were the words he used. I said, wow, let me see. And he holds up a piece of construction paper, and everyone was the same below it. And the kids had gone online, found a picture of a computer monitor, printed it, cut it out, pasted it, put it on the sheet, found a picture of a keyboard, printed it, cut it out, pasted. That was their built computer. I'm like, are you serious? So one of the things I have a hard time with, and people who know me know this well, there are moments in my week when I want to rewind. You know, I'm like, it's a cartoon bubble suddenly becomes out of my mouth. And I looked at the principal, and I looked at this consultant, and I said, wow, working on rigor, eh? And they didn't get it. They were like, yeah, we've been working on it for 2 years. I was like, I don't know if there's a remedial rigor course, but I think you ought to look at it, right? And I'm thinking to the principal, what are you doing here? You just spent $4 million to get this? Are you kidding me? So I want to contrast that because I go down the street maybe 3 miles away at the most, and I go to an elementary school. And I walk into this elementary school. It was a 3rd grade classroom. It was co-taught by a special ed teacher and a general education teacher, teaching together. Every student in that classroom had a laptop, every kid. And every kid had an iPad, every 2 kids had a laptop. And they each had an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper with a QR code on it. And there was one guiding question on the board. These are 3rd graders. And the guiding question was, how can one person alter the face of history? 3rd grade. And the QR codes were designed so that if 2 of us were working together, I would have a historical figure from one era, and my partner would have one of another era. And we had to develop this 3 to 4 minute presentation, however we wanted to do it, using our iPad or our laptop, to suggest to folks or our other colleagues, our friends, our 3rd graders, what our answer to the question was. So I walked out of the classroom, and I walked out of the school, and one of the Secretary's communications people was with me, and he said, what'd you think about the school? And I thought he was probably expected a response was, I'm going to do cartwheels because this is awesome. And I said, you know what? I'm really sad. And he was surprised. So what's up? I said, I'm sad that every kid in America can't have those two teachers and have that classroom. And those kids in that elementary school, you know where they were going to middle school? Up to build their own computer in that 7th grade classroom. That's what they were headed towards. And I kept thinking about this, and I thought, where's the vision in the school district? Where's the superintendent? What's the vision? What were the expectations for the principal? Who's holding these people accountable? But mostly I came back to this question of like, what do I want from my own child? And it's not the cutouts, I want the QR codes. That's what I want for every kid in America. So what I think it's really important, I came upon this quote and I love it is, so think about this as you're preparing, and I know, we know educators, you get the whole summer off, so I know you're lazing on a beach somewhere, kidding. But really, think about this question when you open up your school year. What's exciting about the work that we really do here? What's exciting? Be able to articulate what we do here is absolutely essential, and this place is cool. You want to be here. Some of the best performing schools I've seen in the country that have pulled themselves out of just really the lowest level of achievement. You get excited in there. I want to volunteer to go teach in these schools because there's this general sense of it's great to be here. And you know what? I'm going to talk about culture in a second. Kids get it. You go into a middle school and if I were to go in your middle school and take 20 kids out, they'll tell me who loves teaching. And then they'll tell me who doesn't. Kids get it. So how do you do this? How do you answer that question? What's exciting about the work we do here? And I can tell you that culture drives strategy. I have been in so many schools across the country who will buy the product that somebody else has, right? When we were in Ohio, we actually had won one of the Race to the Top competitions. And I can tell you within a week, I had received about 200 emails from vendors, and I apologize to vendors who were in the room, if anybody, but I'd get 200 emails, and it was just simply this: if you buy our product for $1 million, all of your kids will graduate from high school. Wow, didn't know that. Buy our product and your kids will be reading on grade level in 3 days. Wow. So people rush to buy something, but you know what? It's the culture, because culture eats strategy every day of the week, every day. Because if you're existing in a culture where you think that some kids can learn and the rest can't, no strategy is going to pull that school up. No strategy. In a healthy school culture, everybody has an unwavering belief in the ability of all of their students to achieve success. Now, I don't have my head in the sand, and I don't think that everybody is going to achieve at the highest level possible. But I go back to my roots as a teacher. If I set goals here and kids got there, it's like ho-hum. But if I set my goals here and kids got here, wow, we've moved somewhere. But everybody believes it. So as the superintendent and other leaders in the school district, you set that pace. And I can tell you your effectiveness as a leader. If you are a superintendent in a school district, everybody in that school district ought to be able to answer this question. What is that, fill in the blank your name, what are his non-negotiables? Every person should know the 3 or 4 things that aren't going to happen on your watch. And if it's language in a middle school, when people are talking about those kids, have a talk with that middle school principal and say, I don't want to hear that again, not on my watch. Don't talk about those kids. Every leader, people who work with that leader ought to know the answer to that question. So when you walk into a school, it's everything you see and smell and touch and feel when you're in a school. That defines the culture. When I walked in that building and saw that, parent hours 3 to 4 p.m., that's part of the culture. We have 1 hour for you every day. Doesn't fit in with your work schedule, sorry. Everything. What's in the hallway? How are you welcomed when you walk into a school? When I was a superintendent, one of the things that we did, we had a lot of kids who would leave. We had a lot of charter schools and mostly private schools in our area. So we had a lot of competition with area schools. And I remember one day that we had gotten in all of our state results. So I sent a letter to all the parents whose kids were going to a school other than in our school system. And I asked why would they consider coming back to our school system, because we had a huge trajectory of growth. And it was pretty incredible, the story we had together. And I loved the team I was with. It was all their work. And I can tell you the bulk of the answers that came back on why they left all had to do with culture. The secretary hung up on me 3 times. The bus driver was mean to my kid. My child got sent to the office multiple times. It was all about culture. I couldn't make it to parent conferences, and I got, chastised by the teacher. It's all about that culture. Some of you may, and some others may not, but a lot of school districts across the country now are dealing things with student engagement. Looking at a lot of surveys. There are a lot of them out there. There's a tripod survey. Ron Ferguson, I know, is here. He has a tripod survey. Russ Quaglia has a Million Voices survey. And what we're finding with those surveys is that there are pretty important information that comes back into a school. But I have to tell you, if you ever engage in one, you have to be really ready for the responses back. Because if you think, your school's a really exciting place, and this is one that came from middle school and high school kids back in 2010, look at, have you ever been bored in classes as a student? Almost 50% of them say every single day. And what happens when you unpack student engagement surveys, inevitably the staff will say, that's not true, who said that? But this is their kids' reality, it's their perception. I was in a school district, it was actually in Cleveland, Ohio, and I was watching these middle school teachers unpack a student engagement survey that they had. And one of the things that I just dearly loved about it was that it took a while for them. It was about a good 45 minutes where they were engaging in W-H-I-N-E, not W-I-N-E. I was ready for the W-I-N-E by the time they got through with the W-H-I-N-E. And they were all like, that's not true, who said that? Ah! But one of the greatest motivators for them was that 82% of their kids responded to this question, does your teacher care if you are absent from school? 82% of the kids said no. That was huge. That was huge for them to stop and think about it. And that one question drove them to this whole transformation of their culture. It's pretty monumental. These are some other examples. They're really hard to see. This was a school I was in Texas, does a lot of work on positive behavior intervention supports, PBIS. But look at these posters were all over the school. Look like a scholar, sound like a scholar, act like a scholar. What it was saying to kids, we're in a scholarly environment. This doesn't take money to do. It just takes an attitude adjustment. It takes a poster on a wall. Here's another one. This is really not a good one, but the poster in the school, the top of this poster was essential skills not tested. And all the teachers got together and figured out, they're not tested, but we want our kids to engage and they have these attributes when they leave our school. So every week they'd be focusing on enthusiasm, endurance, humor. The only problem with this is the teachers found there's a great story though. When they were engaging in this, they would have some 8th graders raise their hand and say, you know what, Mrs. Smith, you're not being really enthusiastic about our lesson today. So you have to be careful. What we want for our kids is what we want too. I want to play you a little video, and I'm just going to give you a small sampling of this video, if I could pull it up. And I want you to think about this student.
My name is Thomas Suarez. I've always had a fascination for computers and technology, and I made a few apps for the iPhone, iPod Touch, and iPad. I'd like to share a couple with you today. My first app was a unique fortune teller called Earth Fortune that would display different colors of Earth depending on what your fortune was. My favorite and most successful app is Bustin' Jeeber, which is a Justin Bieber whack-a-mole. I created it because a lot of people at school disliked Justin Bieber a little bit, so I decided to make the app. So I went to work programming it, and I released it just before the holidays in 2010. A lot of people ask me, how did I make these? A lot of times it's because the person who asked the question wants to make an app also. A lot of kids these days like to play games, but now they want to make them. And it's difficult because not many kids know where to go to find out how to make a program. I mean, for soccer, you could go to a soccer team. For violin, you could get lessons for a violin. But what if you want to make an app? And the kids' parents might have done some of these things when they were young, but not many parents have written apps. Where do you go to find out how to make an app? Well, this is how I approached it. This is what I did. First of all, I've been programming in multiple other programming languages to get the basics down, such as Python, C, Java, etc. And then Apple released the iPhone, and with it, the iPhone Software Development Kit.
I'm going to stop that for just a second. An amazing kid by sure. And most of the times if I show this video, it's a wonderful video. It's available on TED if you ever want to look it up. But what is really great is he goes on to talk about how kids aren't just interested in games, they're actually interested in creating games. And there's a whole new wave of research going on across the country about how to actually engage kids in the new standards in a game-like setting. Penn Foster has just invested a huge amount of money. That's one example of them creating it. They actually believe that if kids, for example, can create avatars, they can learn a lot more going through historical periods and science expeditions, etc. But most times when I show this video, if we had a longer amount of time, we'd engage in conversation around the table because I get a split in the room. I usually say, how many of you know that there are a whole bunch of Thomases in your school? And about half the room raises their hand. How many of you believe Thomas is an anomaly? And about half raise their hand. The issue is, though, there are a lot of Thomases like this. Maybe not to this extent. But these are the kids who are coming into our schools. So I have to ask you, how does your school system deal with the Thomases of the world? In what ways can your school tap into the talents of students like Thomas? So what did Thomas end up doing? He got an adult in his school to create a class after school, like an after-school program on the development of apps. And the adult said, the teacher said, I don't know anything about it. And Thomas said, don't worry, I got you covered. I'll take care of it. You just need to be here for insurance purposes, right? But here's a kid. But if he goes back into his classroom and he starts learning page by page, you know that Thomas is going to be turned off. But we have Thomases like this all of our time. So what message I want to bring to you today is that success is achieved by design. It's not by chance. Every school in America that is achieving or rapidly improving, they have a leader who's visionary, who's courageous, and believes that there's a huge design for their time being there. So think about it. All of us are not going to be in our jobs forever. So what legacy do you want to leave behind? What do you want people to say when you leave? And what programs and policies and things do you do in your school district that say, wow, that was because of him that it happened, not by chance? I know I'm nearing the end here, but a couple of things that I really want. These are the attributes of success we're finding across our country. But I have to tell you, out of all the work, especially out of the work that's come out of Harvard on the importance of the teacher in the classroom, and the importance of that highly effective teacher matters, it could trump anything that comes into that classroom from outside. It trumps poverty, etc. But the one that we haven't exposed as much is that leadership matters, and it matters a whole lot. I have seen some absolutely amazing teachers wither on the vine because the principal doesn't even know their name. They're never out of their classroom. They get so driven by data, it's pretty phenomenal. But they don't know what to do with it. They don't know how to respond. And so teachers are clustered in silos. But leadership matters, and I can tell you it matters a lot. In our most rapidly improving schools and the highest achieving schools in the country, I can tell you the leaders don't buy into 27 strategies. They have 2 of them, 1 of them, and they stick with it. They beat that strategy like anything, and it works. There's a school in Massachusetts, Brockton High School, 10 years ago, one of the worst performing high schools in the country. One of the worst. The principal came in 11 years ago, started a strategy only focused on literacy at the high school level. You know, she had science teachers who walked up and said, I'm not a reading teacher. I'm a scientist. And the response back was, you're not a scientist, you're a biology teacher, for gosh sakes. If you're a scientist, you'd be in a lab somewhere. You're going to help kids to learn to read in your class. They're now one of the highest performing high schools in Massachusetts. And these are kids that most people would right away. One strategy, total focus on it. And there are countless examples like that. And hope and advocacy drive the system. That's why leadership matters so much. Everything you do, how you approach your staff on the first day of school, it tells them what's important. If you sit up there and drone on like, oh, we're going to do this, people aren't enthused. But people will follow you when they know you have a vision and you're going to support them in doing that work. It matters, and it matters a lot. So a couple of lessons that I've learned along the way. No excuses, and you know what? Changing expectations is free. You don't have to buy it off the shelf. The expectations you set for a school or a school district, it's absolutely free. But it takes courage to do that. It takes tenacity to do that. But all of our kids in our schools deserve our best so that they can become their best. Transformation takes tenacity. It doesn't take brilliance. I'm not suggesting you're not brilliant, but it doesn't take brilliance. We don't need one more blue ribbon commission to tell us what our schools need. We know it. You know it in your heart of hearts. It's just the big question is, do you have the courage and the tenacity to do that? So when I think about school leaders in closing, this is what I think of. You're all superheroes on that train that we know as education. This is a great moment of frustration for all of us in education because there's huge transformation that we're being asked to do. But it's also a tremendous opportunity for us to be the superheroes to our kids because that's what they think of us. You could be the superhero to a teacher. That's what matters. And I love this cartoon, if you could see it. Keeping up with the demands. Oh crap, was that today? Sometimes our jobs get the best of us, right? Yeah, there's a rolling laughter. I love that. Sometimes I'm on the island, the ship's already left. But what do you do? How do you deal with that as a leader? So as I leave you, let me leave you with a cartoon and then one wish for you. Sometimes I lie awake at night and I ask, what's the meaning of life? And then a voice comes to me that says, I before E, except after C. I hope you have way more meaning in your life than I before E, except after C. So my wish for you as you continue our important work is to be extraordinary, just to be extraordinary. Because kids are counting on you to make the right decisions for them. Every single kid is counting on you to do that. So let me thank you from the bottom of my heart, from the Department of Education, from the White House and the Secretary. Let me say thank you for what you do, because what you do matters, and it matters a whole lot. So thank you so much.